So we are moving into the next section now. We're trying to recover time, and we have to apologize for the delay from the technical issues that we had at the beginning. And we are moving in the session 4 now. This session is devised to actually talk about the specific issues that were shown in each case study in interaction with the different stakeholders. And the first talk is going to be the case study in Spain, and we're going to have the shared contribution of Jaime Gutiérrez Bayo from Bruma and Ana Silio from the Environmental Hydraulic Institute. So I'll let you to it, guys. Jaime, if you are ready.
Okay, I'm ready. Can you hear me?
Yeah, all good.
Okay. And can you see presentation now? So hello everyone, I'm Jaime Gutiérrez. I'm an external collaborator of IH Cantabria in this project, and I want to explain very briefly some general aspects related to the social view of the project in Cantabria. I'm going to share this talk with Ana Silio, so thanks, Ana. These are the river basins included in this case study. They are called Pas, Mira, and Asom. And now I'm going to talk about challenges in this project. I would like to highlight 4 that have been truly relevant for us. The first one was adopting a common language in this project, especially from the first workshop. We realized that the terminology we were using was not familiar to stakeholders. And this was an important barrier to development of the project. So we looked for a way to solve it, especially through the electronic newsletter and the Alice website. The second one was to have an integrated view of the landscape and aquatic ecosystems. And obviously, each person and each group came to the project with a particular vision of the study areas and the problems related to the management of Atlantic landscapes. Most had a vision that was very focused on their own activity and interest, and workshops, newsletters, and videos have been a good experience to put themselves in the place of others, understand very different realities, and understand the relationship between different subsystems that make up the territory and the landscape. At the same time, the stakeholders have helped IH Cantabria scientists to understand many of the socioeconomic components that are key to the future deployment of BGINs in Cantabria. The third one was maintaining an ongoing relationship with the stakeholders, and this is something very related with the talk of Johanna. The Planet methodology includes 3 workshops along the project, among other tools, and in our case, we need specific tools to maintain a fluid relationship with the stakeholders and to establish a pattern of continuous learning with them. Once again, the newsletter and the website help us to keep the communication channel open continuously. And in the last place, familiarize agents with numerical models and scenarios. In general, stakeholders of our territory were not familiar with the models and scenarios. And while those that refer to the evolution of the climate are better known and have greater trust according to the results obtained in the third workshop, Those that refer to the occupation and land uses are still unknown for stakeholders. And thanks to Alice, many agents in Cantabria have been able to learn more about these tools and even introduce part of their knowledge into them. This is the path we have traveled together, scientists and stakeholders, thanks to Alice project. First workshop, to meet each other and to identify the major problems of the basins in relation to the future of Atlantic landscapes and their ecosystems. It was very helpful in identifying the barriers. A second workshop to identify problems and possible solutions through the deployment of nature-based solutions. As you can see, the first one was a physical workshop, face-to-face, but the second and the third was online workshops. So in the second workshops, we identified problems and possible solutions through the deployment of nature-based solutions. And in the third workshop, we learned about the concrete effects of BGINs can have on the control of floods, erosion, and fires, which are the three main problems that stakeholders identified in this area in Cantabria. And this is the final congress to share results of the 4 case studies. For the purpose of adopting a common language and basic knowledge of Alice topics, as I have already said, the electronic newsletter and the informative videos have been simple but very effective tools. Its application was essential in order to achieve effective stakeholder participation. As you can see, we made 9 newsletters tackling relevant and specific issues. More than 1,000 people have accessed each issue, and 3 specific videos about potential solutions. As you can see, one of the achievements of the project is that the stakeholders themselves have defined the main problems of these basins. That is why Alice has also been an important collaborative work experience. We used some tools like surveys, interviews, workshops, and expert criteria. As a result, we had a problem prioritization like this: the first of all, floods, second, fires, and in the third position, erosion. The main achievements in this project in Cantabria, from a social point of view and a personal point of view, are 3. The first one, stakeholders' interest in the implementation of the BGINs have been raised. Not just the people who have actively participated in the project, many others who have played a more passive role as well. So in the second place, we have a very favorable context that has been created for the competent authorities to implement a network of BGINs. And there is a high degree of trust in the models and scenarios developed. During the last workshop, we did a small survey, and the rating was about 7 in a range of 10 points possible. So I think it's a great result. So thank you very much for your attention, and see you soon. And now it's Anna's turn. Please, Anna, can you continue?
So I'm just going to
Okay,
go.
thank you very much.
Jaime, don't stop sharing the presentation. I'll go with yours. Yeah.
Okay.
Go to the next one, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's no, don't stop. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Now. Okay. So I'm just going to sum up a bit the technical work that we did for, well, based on these. Jaime, the previous one, please. So, well, basically what we did was...
Wait. Do you want to change and...
Not now. Go to the previous one, please.
Okay.
Okay.
This one?
Yeah, that's good. So, based on on all the work, the downscaling work, climatic data that, for example, the guys from Utah did, and so on, we extracted some trends of the climate. So basically, this is nothing new. I mean, we know that there's going to be for 2050, there's going to be a decrease in the precipitation, an increase in the maximum and minimum temperatures. Go on, please. The next one. And these data, these climatic data, they are important. They are the drivers, together with the land use and land cover maps, that we retrieve from, well, the work that Jose Manuel explained in his talk yesterday. So this is the actual scenario. The next one, please. Next one. Jaime? Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's it. So using a business as usual scenario and the FORSM models that Thomas explained yesterday as well, we extracted what the land cover, the dynamics of the land cover maps next for 2050. And then we also address the different ecosystem services by all the modeling that it has been done, and it has been, well, that it was also explained in the yesterday. This is just an example of the water quality and the first water and biodiversity and ecological status. But we use all these inputs in order to construct the BGINs. Next, please. Next, Jaime. Okay.
Tiene un poco de retardo.
So, getting together all this information, the climate, the land cover, and all the services that we wanted to focus on, we identify some core areas for these, well, for addressing these problems that affect the region, like fire erosion and flooding. Next. And then we did a connectivity analysis. So in order to do the actual network and the next one. Next one.
Tarda.
Okay, and this is what we got, validated with, during the workshop, the last workshop that we have with the stakeholders, addressing all the problems and the points, the points that you see there are the ones that they were identified in workshop 2. So everything has been covered, and all the stakeholders were quite happy with the results. Next, please. Okay, next.
Yes.
So this is the well, I mean, this is using the BGINs that we designed. We use them in order to get the, for example, what would be the scenario for the actual land cover, considering the inclusion of BGINs. Next, please. Next.
Yes.
Okay, so basically the main difference that we observe are the if we only focus on a scenario without the BGINs, I mean there's an actual abandonment of the territory that is favors the advance of the shrubland over pastures. And also the inclusion of the fires that they hinder the forest dynamics. But in the case of foreseeing the implementation of BGIN, the scenario is a bit different. I mean, there's the suppression of uncontrolled fires that consolidates the forest and the ecosystem service provision. Next. Okay, so these are the results. Next. Okay, nice. If we take, in terms of this ecosystem services, this is what we get. I mean, this is the flood protection versus the food provisioning, and we observe that there's an increase of the ecosystem services in terms, a general increase in this scenario where there's an investment in BGINs. So the synergistic relationship between the provisioning and the regulatory services create a green-win situations that encourage investment in BGINs. Next. And this is my last.
Yes. It's coming.
Okay, so, but there's also true that there are trade-offs that they have to be made between the ecosystem services. For example, this is just an example of what the runoff regulation is. So with and without and the BGIN implementation, and what happens, for example, in the case of the meat production is very clear. I mean, what we get is that there's a loss of about 12% of the productive grassland because, we are using those areas for a hydrological control. So basically, the main message is that once that we have the BGINs design, everything has to be okay. There must be a compromise and a trade-off between all the ecosystem services in order to enhance one or the other, depending on the problem of the area. Thank you very much, and I hope.
Thanks a lot, Ana and Jaime, for this talk. We're going to move into the next one, which is the French case study, and I think Thomas and Sandrine and Sylvie are gonna talk about this case study. So go ahead, Thomas. Thomas, I think your mic is off. We cannot hear anything.
Okay, sorry. I did not start. I was believing my mic was muted by the administrator of the Zoom Okay, so I'm gonna speak for all the people that has participated to the project for France, and this is a joint talk from all participants from the French case study. And Sylvie is not; she's looking through the Vimeo support, but she's not part of the team with Sandrine and I. So I will mainly focus on the results from the French case study and not on the feedbacks from the stakeholders yet, because our final meeting where we should celebrate, as Joanna said, will be next week or the week after. So we are a little bit on another time schedule. Anyway, so these are the main results from the case study. So just a short reminder about the landscape changes over the past. So in France, as you can see, there was a strong agricultural intensification and a moderate urban sprawling, which are the main two land use changes over this area. So it is explained by a strong decrease of grassland that have been converted in maize and cereals, as well as an increase of shrublands in the valley bottoms, where grassland has been abandoned by agriculture, by farmers, and also the implementation of a new highway in this area that explain most of the urban growth over the past. And the BGIN, as we already said, has been designed for this area, and it is pretty dense because there is a strong network of hedgerows, there is a strong network of rivers, so it explains why there is such a dense, denser ecological networks of corridors. And we use this map as a constraint to simulate different kind of scenarios. And these scenarios were made from the participatory process with the stakeholders. And it is the result of the cross combination of two types of development, an agricultural development and a territorial development. For each of these developments, we define three contrasted assumptions. The first one is like a usual territorial development, a little bit of urban sprawling with less habitants expected for 2050. The BGINs are protected, but only the main ones, whereas the connectivity is 100%, as you can see in this little graph. And two other assumptions, the energy transition and ecological citizens. Energy transition is the most attractive one because it creates employment and so on. And so that's the reason why people are much numbered. And in this case, we try to protect all the corridors, even those ones that have less connectivity or less importance in terms of connectivity, those ones represented with 50% of connectivity here. So it is a larger area that could be protected thanks to this scenario. And ecological citizens, it is only the 75% because, in fact, people want to go back in the countryside and they don't want to move in cities in order to increase their quality of life and to go towards more green, in fact. On the other side, on the agricultural development, we consider a business as usual scenario, which goes towards a livestock dairy intensification, like it was over the past. And two other ones, like a more cropping system in cereals, like a cerealization of the production for biofuel, biomass. It means like energy production mainly. And another one, which is the diversification of practices and land uses, which is driven by the implementation of payment for ecosystem services. And when you combine all these assumptions, you can create theoretically 9 scenarios, but we just retain 5 of them in order to explore the most contrasted ones. So here are the results that we obtain from the land use and land cover change model. You start from the basic, the basis situation, the current one. And as you can see, the dairy intensification for business as usual and double performances scenario increase the surface of maize and in the detriment of grassland. And there is a little increase of urban sprawling as well, but as you can see between both scenarios, there is one that is more related to countryside development in the countryside, while the other one concentrates all urbanization in the major urban area. And it is pretty much the same for the two others, where there are a strong increase of cereals like wheat for the two energy-based agricultural scenarios. And here, what does look like the green living scenario, which is the most green ones in terms of way of life and agricultural practices. And finally, you can see that the green living is just a situation that is close from the one that you could have observed in 1990. So when we compare these scenarios, we can do some spatial analysis, and in that case, we just wanted to highlight where area would intensify in the worst case scenario in terms of agricultural land uses. And you can see that it is almost the same area that are concerned by agricultural intensification, which is those ones that are actually the most intensified as well. And I won't go into the details about this table, but it just to illustrate what the kind of statistics that we can extract from this simulation, this annual simulation. And when we sum all the urban sprawl of the 5 scenarios, you can detect where are the area concerned by this sprawling, because if you just remind that BGIN are originally implemented to control and to limit the grey infrastructure development. So when you compared the current BGINs and where the development is expected to occur in the future, in 5 scenarios, which is a darker area, or in one scenario on the or only in one scenario, some of this area around Fougères are concerned by development and are slightly affected some corridors, which is basically a good point. So thanks to this kind of analysis, we can identify area at stake. And the question is, does it really matter? And it allows also to rank these areas that need to be preserved, and maybe some others don't need to be preserved and are opportunity to this kind of development. Then we try to assess the impact of these changes, land use and land cover changes, on landscape connectivity. So in that case, we consider woodland connectivity, grassland connectivity, and wetlands connectivity, thanks to the collaboration with the INRAE and the team of Jacques Baudry that you can heard yesterday. And when you sum up these 3 type of connectivity, you can see the impact of these changes on the landscape connectivity as a whole. And you can see that the 4 scenario of agricultural intensification strongly decrease the potential connectivity of the landscape over the future, while the greening one, of course, improves this connectivity. But when we look at the detail, you can see that first, it means that the agricultural land uses can completely jeopardize the efficiency of BGINs that have been designed at the very beginning, the current BGIN, in fact. So on the other side, when we only focus and when we compare, we can say that BGINs actually are really efficient to limit the grey infrastructure development, because when we consider some less efficiency of municipality governance in terms of preservation of corridors, or when we consider the change of the social changes of preferences in terms of location to live in, it's only approximately 1% of the landscape connectivity that is affected by this kind of drivers. So it means that currently the BGIN is efficient, but can be completely jeopardized by the agricultural intensification in the future. And the fact is that nowadays in France, BGIN's policies has no influence at all on agricultural land uses. Then we made a clear, short focus on water quantity, and concerning the water quantity, the climate change has a strong impact on water quantity. Basically, I would say that whatever the kind of scenarios, we can consider that it is mainly the same summer flow that will be that we can see in the future, and the same impact on water temperature, because land uses not significantly affect these water resources in terms of quantity. But as it has been highlighted by our partner from the SAGE-QUENO, maybe these estimations are overestimated or underestimated, it depends on the point of view, but because it does not integrate all the changes of riparian wetland restoration, of hedgerows maintenance, and so on. So basically, from this kind of model, we have a broad overview of what could be the impact of these kind of changes, but we need to refine this kind of outputs to be sure that we can better integrate all these land use management that are actually made in such a case. In terms of water quality, there is also, I would say that the reduce of summer flow of the water during the summer, it has a strong impact of nitrates and pesticide and phosphorus concentration in the river. So it means that even if the practices are getting better and better, the thing is that the flow would be too small, that will implicate some nitrates concentration, and it will jeopardize all the effort made over the last 20 years, for instance. So it is quite a pity, but it is like that. And once again, I would say that one intensification scenario on dairy production would lead to more nitrates concentration, while the cereal or energy-based scenario would not. But inversely, the energy-based scenario would have strong consequences on phosphorus pollutants and probably pesticide, which has not been evaluated here in that case. So it means that you allow to maintain a good water quality in that case. And of course, the cost of the water treatment would be increased strongly due to this kind of agricultural land use intensification. So to conclude, we can say that from this case study, we have underlined that BGINs play an effective role on ecosystem services and constitute an efficient policy to limit the grey infrastructure. And it is possible to anticipate the possible social and political change by identifying the long-term and future graze area, but also that future agricultural intensification can jeopardize the BGINs efficiency. So it means that the impact of agricultural land uses on landscape connectivity is even more important than the BGIN policy as defined in France. And what are the challenges ahead for the QUENO watershed? Of course, it is about reconciling agricultural and non-agricultural land uses, because actually it is two worlds that live in parallel, and it is mainly the case in most of the places over the world. We have to be innovative in terms of future land management, in what we call the SCOT in France. For limiting the agricultural intensification, we have to define some incentives, constraints, and participation. And I think that what John shown this morning about the willingness to pay could be a way to help farmers into this kind of maybe conversion to more organic farming, more diversified farming, rather than going through the trends of intensifying their production. Of course, we have to define adapted strategies regarding the different area at stake, because some areas are more favorable for agricultural intensification, and some other could be more favorable for maybe organic development. So we have to consider these internal differences within each case study to improve the landscape management efficiency. And of course, all these changes would imply some future conflicts or tensions on the water resources, because there will be maybe a strong increase of the water demand for agricultural purposes. The increase of population would, of course, increase the water demand as well. And the climate change will contribute to reduce the amount of water available. So this kind of change will have to be anticipated. And of course, the BGINs appear to be something very, very important. So without this kind of quantitative approach and assessment, of course, this wouldn't have been possible. But some of these evaluation needs to be refined, as I already said. I would say that the take-home message from this case study is that, okay, if you look at the regional BGINs structure that has been defined and revised and approved very recently in January 21, you can see that finally there is one big regional corridor that is at stake at the regional scale, but which has not so much meanings as a local scale. So designing a local BGINs is it's even important in that case. Whatever the model or the way you define these BGINs, because you can use this kind of approach, or you can use this one that also ranks the places that are very much at stake in terms of connectivity. But I would say that the main important issue is not about designing the most efficient BGIN, but in that case, to provide the regulatory tools associated to the BGINs policies that will influence all the land users and land uses. And I think it is really important because the BGINs policy has no influence on agricultural land uses. Of course, it may have no influence in the preservation of biodiversity and all ecosystem services. So thank you very much for your attention. And I finally would like to thank once again all our partners and all the people that participated to the participatory meetings, and especially the Sage Quenon and Sylvie Leroy for being part of this Alice adventure. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Thomas, for such a good talk from the French case study. Impressive work in the French case study. So for those ones that are connecting now, we just missing. We just need another. We're going to have another 2 talks. We just 1 talk behind schedule. So the next speaker now is Edna Cavejinha from the CITAB and the Universidad de Trás-os-Montes Alto Douro from Portugal, and she's going to introduce the experience from the Portuguese case study from Alice. So Edna, all yours when you're ready.
Thank you, Pepe. So I'm presenting you today engaging communities into ecosystem services, innovating with nature towards integrated landscapes. So as you all know now, Alice has 4 case studies, and I'm presenting you the main results from the Portuguese case study, that is the River Paiva watershed. So one of the main pillars of this project is the participatory approach. And for this, the stakeholder forum was an important issue for this project. Therefore, we select different levels of stakeholders, from policymakers and regulators to managers to NGOs to enterprises related to economic and leisure activities. To them all, our biggest thanks for their participation in this project. So their engagement was started in the beginning of the project and go along with Alice's deliverables. So it started in March 29 with the identification of the main environmental problems, and afterwards, in the second workshop, they identify the main blue and green infrastructures that could address the environmental issues that were identified previously on the first workshop Additionally, the barriers to the implementation of these structures was also identified. And last week, we had our last workshop in Alice with all the stakeholders involved to discuss the scenario building, but also to perform a multi-criteria analysis to identify the most vulnerable areas and to prioritize actions to look at the future and to define the green commitment strategy for the Paiva watershed. So as I told you before, in the first workshop, we identified the main environmental issues in the watershed, but we also prioritized these issues about the importance that they have for the solution to be identified. Also, they identify the main ecosystem services in the basin, namely regulation, provision, but also cultural ecosystem services. Based on that work, we could identify the main three socio-environmental issues related to water management, quantity and quality, also connectivity, lateral but also longitudinal around the river, and forest management, taking the account that this is a watershed with enormous areas of monocultural areas related to eucalyptus and pinus, but also to the immense fire risk in the basin. So we could identify the main environmental challenges to be addressed and the main actions required. So for water management and water quantity and quality, the main aspects that were focused were the floods, but also some quality issues related to organic pollution in several points of this basin, and also the connectivity, because this basin has a huge number of wires that really limits the mobility of some species to go upriver. But the main environmental issue was really the fire risk, because for this basin in 10 years, have almost 50% of the basin burned, and the fire frequency in some areas has been up to 40 times in these 10 years. So it's very important to look up to landscape heterogeneity, to reduce this fire risk, and to control also the erosion control and implement best management practices here. So looking at this in the second workshop, our stakeholders select where were the most important areas to intervene, and also what could be the blue and green infrastructures to mitigate locally these problems. Additionally, they identify for each blue and green infrastructure that they selected what were the main barriers for its implementation in the field, and the main one was institutional and governance barriers related to a lack of clear definition of roles and responsibility for the different institutions involved. Also, a not very integrative governance process with the involvement of the local communities, and a lack of long-term vision, looking more to an adaptive management, and a lack of cooperation between institutions. Therefore, for the main three environmental problems, they identified the top 5 barriers for the implementation of the blue and green infrastructures, and also address several solutions that could be applied to overcome these identified barriers. In this last workshop, we discussed the scenario building. So with the ground of the climate changes based on the RCP 4.5 and the RCP 8.5, we establish the changes that will occur in these 30 years, so until 2015. We also discussed the two main scenarios for the watershed. One, based on the historical trends, with the increasing of anthropogenic pressure, mostly related to tourism, that is business as usual scenario, and also one that we will increase the implementation of blue and green infrastructures, increasing biodiversity conservation and the ecosystem's resilience, called green commitments. So we estimate and simulate the two different scenarios from the RCP, and the more extreme for the basin was the 8.5. So this was the one chosen for the following work established. Now I'm just presenting to you, facing the short time that we have today, the main ecosystem services delivered for the watershed. So with the different scenarios, here you have presented the recreation outdoor related to cultural ecosystem services, and with the green scenario and the implementation of blue and green infrastructures, these will improve, reducing, probably with trade-offs, provision. Related to the most important provision ecosystem service in the basin related to timber production, the introduction of blue and green infrastructures will reduce the production of wood, but we will increase the ecosystem's service in regulation and also on biodiversity conservation. For the flood risk, really the green scenarios in the implementation of these blue and green infrastructures will reduce the flood risk in a very important way. And of course, we will win in regulation ecosystem services as well as on biodiversity. The same trend we have when we are looking for fire risk, and the green scenario will improve in a big way the risk of reduction of fire risk. Of course, having some trade-offs on the production, implementing better heterogeneity of the different habitats presented on the watershed. So having all this in mind, the stakeholders were asked in the last workshop to perform a multi-criteria analysis, giving different weights to criteria and indicators based on a deep sea analysis, and based on the weights that they deliver for these criteria and indicators, we were capable to perform a map with the most vulnerable areas in the watershed and prioritize them by order of the urgency to implement blue and green infrastructures, so that they could establish a strategy for this implementation in the Paiva watershed. Therefore, the main objective of Alice in the Portuguese case study was to address, through nature-based solutions, namely blue and green infrastructures, the different societal challenges addressed for this case study in particular, boosting the ecosystem service deliverable and the biodiversity conservation as well, seeing, of course, the different trade-offs that are needed to implement these measures, and also, of course, try to give an input on the policy instruments that are now having developed in the watershed. Therefore, in the last workshop, as Joanna stated already, we had a huge involvement of the stakeholders once more. And we have an agreement what was the green commitment for the Paiva strategy 2050 with a rank of actions to be implemented in the field in the next years. And we hope that all together, with the example of Alice, we can really boost a paradigm shift, improving the cooperation among all the institutions involved in this case study to an integrated action to the territory. And once more, I really want to thank to all the involved, all the stakeholders, but all the team that really work hard on this case study. Thank you all.
Thanks a lot, Edna, for such an interesting talk on the Portuguese case study. We're moving now into the next one, next talk of the day and of the Congress. It will be given by Bruce Howard, and he will be introducing us to the North Island case study, Carlingford Lough. So Bruce, whenever you're ready.
Great. Well, thank you for inviting us to speak about the experience of the Carlingford Catchment in implementing blue-green infrastructure networks. So you've obviously heard bits about the catchment earlier today from Diane from the Alice team, but obviously also in your previous meetings. But by way of reminder, it's occupying 540 square kilometres on the east coast of the island of Ireland, the majority in Northern Ireland, but also part of the Republic of Ireland. So I'm Bruce Howard, and I've had the pleasure of facilitating workshops that have formed part of the extensive stakeholder engagement that happened within this Alice case study. The Alice team from AFBI have done most of the work in identifying and engaging people on whom the future of this river catchment depends. What I'm going to be doing is sharing some insight from the stakeholder engagement work undertaken by AFBI, Northern Ireland's Agri-Food and Biosciences Institute. I'm going to be focusing on the barriers and solutions to implementing the natural features that we call blue-green infrastructure. So before I go into detail, here's the big message. While the project has thought lots about the different types of blue and green infrastructure that could deliver value for people and nature, here are some of the key ingredients for bringing about change. Firstly, as you can see here, it's about social networks. By this, I mean relationships of trust and cooperation between the organizations that can deliver change. You can't have a network of blue-green infrastructure without the network of people and organizations willing and able to share resources, attract new finance, and work together for the good of people and nature. So first ingredient, energized social networks. And of course, the second ingredient is the evidence that motivates people to work differently. Hence, I've called it energizing evidence. Evidence can be very technical and tends often to be of academic interest or interest to government only. But it can be presented in ways that energize people to take action. And I'm pleased to report that's, I think, what has happened within the stakeholders interested in the Carlingford Catchment. For Carlingford Catchment, the social networks, I think it's fair to say, are just at the beginning, the social networks to deliver this blue-green infrastructure. However, thanks to the modelling work of Alice partners and the toolkit that the Alice team has published for the Carlingford Catchment, I think we've got the beginnings now of that energising evidence. I'll explain a bit more in a minute. So that was just the summary of our presentation today. So here's the timeline for the stakeholder dialogue within the Carlingford Catchment case study. You'll see that there have been workshops. We did manage to meet face-to-face before COVID came along. We called these online meetings, though the latter workshops are Carlingford Catchment Conversations. But all of the face-to-face workshop and then the online meetings have all depended on the year-round work of the ALICE team. There have been 2 periods of interviews with individual stakeholders, meetings 1-to-1, and the second period of interviews was specifically with farmers, which, as we heard from Diane Burgess earlier, are a crucial group of stakeholders for this catchment. So here are some of the groups of people that the case study has been engaging with. There are lots of different interests in this catchment, ranging from recreational interests in fishing and such like to woodland, and there are interest in peatland, tourism. It's very diverse. There are also a very diverse range of organizations. We've engaged with some individual citizens who are concerned for the future of the catchment. And we've engaged with some very large organizations, indeed government that works right across Northern Ireland as well. So there's great diversity here. But an important thing to note is that with the exception of farm businesses, the stakeholder interests aren't just within this catchment. They extend to land and water outside of the catchment as well. So there are very few stakeholders that are just interested in the land area of the catchment. We've talked to people working across the whole of Northern Ireland, and that's really affected the stakeholder engagement. So this slide here shows some of the techniques that have been used in the stakeholder dialogue. They were very simple techniques. We're meeting face to face, presenting maps of the catchment, asking people to identify them. We were also stimulating dialogue via questions as well. And a really important thing as well was to share some examples of success elsewhere that might inspire work within Carlingford Catchment. Diane this morning mentioned the work of the Tweed Forum, which is another cross-border England-Scotland catchment management initiative that's been very successful. So in the first workshop, we asked questions about who else needed to be involved in this stakeholder dialogue. And I think that's really important to consider that the conversation builds and one stakeholder will recommend another one and help to bring them in to the process. So blue-green infrastructure, of course, as we all well know, is quite complex, and there are lots of benefits to consider at lots of different spatial scales. People need to be free to use the language that they're comfortable with. And yes, while we've talked about blue-green infrastructure within this case study, we've been talking about nature-friendly farming, natural capital, and nature-based solutions. We've been very flexible with the language that different stakeholders want to use. So we have given people also a sense that we're building a conversation, and the toolkit on nature-friendly farming that the case study team have released came actually out of what was said in the first workshop and in the interviews from farmers. So we've been able to demonstrate that we've responded to what stakeholders have said and asked for. So here are some of the key issues from the stakeholder engagement. The key question, of course, is how do we work with these stakeholders to explore the opportunity for blue-green infrastructure networks? It's become clear through the process that Carlingford Catchment has some special challenges. They're not challenges that you'll only find in Carlingford Catchment, but they're a particularly big challenge. And one of it is that the geographical area of this river catchment is not the only area that people are thinking about in this part of the island of Ireland. So there are some major tourism destinations, the mountains of Mourne, for example, and they have their own energy, and stakeholders are already talking about those places. So they tend to get quite a bit of attention. Of course, it goes without saying that there is an international border running through the catchment, and that presents a challenge in terms of bringing people together. The local administrative areas, the municipalities, there has been change in the boundaries of those, and they don't reflect the river catchment. As Diane mentioned this morning, this landscape of Carlingford Catchment has many small, relatively small farm businesses. There's a very complex mix of land ownership. And indeed, there's modifications to the catchment as well. There's stretches of canal as well. I think the big challenge here is that we've discovered is that there's no single issue for this catchment which energizes stakeholders. In some catchments, it may be the risk of fire. In other catchments, it may be to do with water quality. But in Carlingford, you've got a mix of different topics. And the fact that there isn't drinking water taken from the catchment also means that, you know, that's not a big issue that often brings people together. So just to illustrate this this problem in a sense of the geography of Carlingford Catchment, you can see it marked in the centre of this slide here. But you can see that the pink and the yellow and the green, these are all different municipalities, local authority areas. And this makes it quite difficult in bringing people together. There's no one administration which covers just the catchment. So here, this slide illustrates that environment and landscape designations don't match the river catchment. I mentioned the mountains of Mourne. You can see them in pink mentioned here. That's a designated landscape that's seen as special. And then across to the west, you've got the Ring of Gullion, a famous volcanic landscape, very big tourist attraction, but just kind of, well, mainly outside of the catchment. So this presents a challenge. Not everybody is working to the boundary of the river catchment. Now, I've talked about lots of barriers and challenges, but here let's talk about some of the opportunity that the stakeholder engagement for Carlingford Catchment has identified. The stakeholder engagement isn't really like arranging a choir, a group of singers, where right from the start you can hear a very good sound. No, the conversation grows over time as people join, and people leave and join. It takes quite a long time to mature. But the great thing is to build a stakeholder dialogue. Your initial stakeholders are the main thing. They will invite other people in and spread the word about the issue, the challenge, like you as the initiator can't. So it takes a long time to cultivate what I might call a mature dialogue about blue-green infrastructure. I think our experience on the positive side is that stakeholders are very positive about working with each other. There are some challenges, like Diane mentioned this morning, of how farmers view working with others. But generally, the idea of collaboration on this complex challenge of blue-green infrastructure is accepted. We've seen evidence sparking conversation, particularly with the modelling outputs that have been produced by Alice. Capacity of organisations to do networking, to link with one another, is very low. The organisations generally don't have an allowance to spend time chatting to others. We're very task orientated, and that does present a challenge. So just a little bit more now on the role of information resources. I think these information resources, like the modelling outputs, they're not a sort of final word that changes people's minds and causes them suddenly to take action. Mapping and modelling is a starting point for conversation. It's fuel for stakeholder dialogue. And we've seen that with the modelling outputs produced for Carlingford Catchment within Alice. One referred to it as a game changer, making a really big difference in motivating people to take action for change. But the evidence really has to be focused on not just being a curiosity, but something that shows that people must take action. And the way that we've looked at the impact of climate change on this catchment and the role of blue-green infrastructure in dealing with climate change issues really has energized people in Carlingford Catchment. So another great opportunity great thing is opportunity mapping. So the modelling outputs were produced for the whole catchment, but then this has caused the identification of effectively 4 areas which are priority for blue-green infrastructure. And there are 5 categories of blue-green infrastructure, which are now the sort of focus for stakeholders. So identifying areas of opportunity, I think, is a great way of turning a quite complicated discussion into something that's motivating for stakeholders. So just summarizing now, if you want to think of the barriers to implementing blue-green infrastructure, yes, it's those social networks which are key. They need to be energized. We also need to remember that whilst river catchments are so important to many of us in this Congress, they're not the geographical areas that everybody works to. People will work to different geographical boundaries, and that's really hard to bring them around to focus or take a catchment approach. The evidence shows from the Carlingford case study that when we show climate change impacts, that really brings people in to a meaningful conversation. Climate change impacts are a great starting point for dialogue. It's also fair to say that a lot of our stakeholders, or a number of them, have spoken about the importance of an economic case for blue-green infrastructure, whether that's for individual farm businesses or whether that's government that's considering supporting a river catchment like this. The economic and financial case is becoming increasingly important and needs to be communicated along with those maps and modelling outputs that I mentioned earlier. So I hope that helps as a quick tour through the stakeholder engagement activities for the Carlingford Catchment case study. Thanks very much for listening, and we look forward to your comments and the discussion later.
For your talk from the Carlingford Law case study. So this was our final talk. We now move into the questions and roundtable about these sessions 3 and 4. So everybody, I see everybody there connecting the cameras. And I think we have a couple of questions coming up from the chats.
Yes, thank you, Pepe. Well, we have two questions for the same person, Simon Langams from BC3. And Simon made a question, makes a question first for Edna, for the Portuguese case study, and asks if Edna, could you explain how you consider trade-offs of conflicting ecosystem services in the final prioritization? Thank you. So, Edna?
Yes, I think I could not understand. How could I something I didn't understand the end?
Yeah, so if you can explain how you consider trade-offs of conflicting ecosystem services, the trade-offs among ecosystem services in the final prioritization of your analysis.
So thank you for the question. So in our last workshop, the stakeholders were asked to think about the strategy to implement into 2050 and to implement the blue and the green commitment. They really have to make some adjustments. So if we want to implement autochthonous forest in some areas to have more heterogeneity and prevent, for instance, fire risk, so I have to take out some from eucalyptus production. I'm sorry, I'm listening to echo. So this means that the people have to be willing to let it go some areas for eucalyptus production where I will win in production, but if I lose these areas, I will decrease my production in wood, but I will win on regulation services. I will have more habitat heterogeneity. I will have risk reduction. And of course, we ask stakeholders to think about it, and they write it in different post-its, like Joanna showed in the previous presentation, all the trade-offs that they think for each of the three environmental problems that they identify as the most important. What were the main trade-offs for the implementation of the green commitment scenario?
Thank you, Edna. There's another question to all of us, actually, from the same person, Simon Lanhans. And it's basically about the stakeholder engagement. If we can elaborate on how the initial selection was done, and if we use additional methods besides snowballing. So who wants to take the floor? No.
I think this is for Joanna, right?
Yes, the problem is that I couldn't hear the question.
No, I believe it's for Edna, Thomas, Diane, and us. And basically, it's about the how the initial selection of stakeholders was done. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes. So
and if we use additional methods besides snowballing.
Well, I can speak for the Portuguese case study. We started to understand what are the major activities in the watershed and what are the main entities responsible for the management in this area. It's a complex watershed. It has different levels of management, to local to national. And so we try to involve everybody in this. So I will pass the word, so I'm not the only one speaking.
Within the Carlingford Catchment, we took a similar approach to Edna, but we focused on the managers rather than activities initially. So we used our contacts within DERA, which is the Department of Agriculture here. We also looked at the council level to see what relevant departments there were, branches, to get people involved, whether that's from the biodiversity or management. With Bruce's guidance, I sent emails to all the councillors, so the political representatives of all the political parties in the area. We didn't get any response. And then we just publicised widely, and also NGOs, so the Ulster Wildlife Trust, the RSPB, we got the Mourns Heritage Trust involved, Sleeve Bullion. So a lot of it was snowballing. It was asking people and asking them to forward on emails and basically just cover every possible person involved in the management, and then as users, so including my old sailing club was one contact, and their Commodore was interviewed. So it's just trying to think as many people as possible and just ask those people and keep on going, keeping on raising the profile to get as many people involved as possible.
Okay, I would just say it was almost the same. So we asked our partners, Sage Quenon, to help us in the identifying all the key persons, the key stakeholders to invite to this participatory meeting. And I would say that there were good ones to do that, because as researchers, we are not in touch with all these stakeholders, but they are. So it was the key entry for such a participation.
Well, I'm going to answer for our case study. Basically, what we did was we firstly identified which were the principal agents that could be interested, covering all different types of society. You mean, like for example, people in the government. I mean, managers. ONGs, people in the ground, and different, I don't know, for example, farmers. And so basically, I believe we have followed more or less the same approach as the rest. But at the beginning, what we did, I mean, for the first workshop, we tried to limit it very much. And then all of a sudden we decided that it was not enough, so we opened it to society, and through the newsletters, as Jaime explained in his presentation, we try to engage more and more stakeholders. So we open it to the people living or being affected by the problems in our area of study. So that was basically it. Thank you.
Finishing, sorry, yes, the last question I wanted to do it, it's my own question, I put in the chat as well, to the more socio-economical part of the project for Diane, from Stephen, John. So how do you feel all these scientific technical developments about mapping almost everything that we mapped in ALICE actually put something on the minds of the stakeholders, people, and action for changing something, our habitat, the way we use the landscape, and the way we get services from the ecosystems? So how do you feel the ALICE results in terms of society and economy?
If I respond first, because I'll talk about the stakeholder analysis or stakeholder workshop we actually held last week. Bruce might want to add in, and then if Stephen and John want to say something. It was really, really positive. We had 2 workshops last week. One was focused on the mapping, which I think was on Tuesday. It seems a long time ago now, where we were producing the results. So showing what the situation is now with the maps, how it would be with no BGINs, basically business as usual, and then showing what the impact of the BGINs would be. And the best response was how our stakeholders were responding, but how they were seeing it as really positive, as game changers, as how they can use it in work going forward. So rather than all saying, as a researcher, I think it's what our stakeholders said, that they saw it as positive, how they could use the results from Alice in their projects and in the management decisions going forward. So from reflecting back, very, very positive. The use of the maps highlighted things clearly, and it showed that we were listening to them to begin with and highlighting what the problems were, and then going through the modelling and getting results that showed them, which would help them, help decision makers, help policy makers. Bruce, is there anything you want to add from the session that we were in last week?
No, I think the only thing to say is it's good just to sort of set out a menu of considerations. So last week we were thinking about wildfire risk, nutrients in watercourses, farm productivity, and such like. So you set out the menu to a group of stakeholders, and you let them choose a topic that then they want to take forward. So you need to give your stakeholders lots of choice as to what they want to talk about, but within the frame, of course, of thinking about the whole catchment and the way that natural features can work together. I think that's all I'd have to say.
I might just jump in there for a second as well. Just to say, Bruce, he mentioned energizing stakeholders, but the work we would do with the stated preference techniques that we use to put values on these blue-green infrastructure networks, they also energize the public, and they get the public and it's important information, because the public ultimately will be, they're the taxpayers. They will be funding a lot of the work going on here. So it's important that not only but the decision makers as well, they see the benefit value of doing this work. And you asked about all the data collected in the project on, I suppose, the habitat ecological side in the case studies. In terms of what the work we do, that allows us to take that information, look at what the predicted scenarios are under like Tomas presented earlier, and use that information then to assess what the change in the ecosystem service values might be under these alternative scenarios that our colleagues are painting. So that's I think very powerful, and as well just to note, again, it's the reality of things that decision makers, they want hard evidence in terms of cost benefit analysis. What are the values associated with these kind of initiatives? And because, like I said earlier, because a lot of the ecosystem services delivered here, they're what we consider non-market. They have value to people, but they're not traded in any particular market. So it's very important, though, that they're taken into account in terms of a cost benefit analysis situation. And I always say when we give these talks, that those the results of those studies, they shouldn't be the one deciding factor, but again, they're just providing more information. And again, it's an education. It's not about the money. It's about the message. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot to all the comments. So basically, we are on time somehow. I don't know how we managed to the end. Sorry. I just have another comment just before closing the roundtable, and my impression is that the willingness to pay, for example, of civilians, on the experiments that you did, Stephen, Diane, Denny, John, somehow involved also in there. I think the willingness to pay of people, or the involvement of people with the BGINs or specific nature-based solution is actually high across the case study. So that's a force to move forward on the implementation of BGINs, and I think that's a really nice take message also from this societal part, you know, and economical part as well, that the people will be willing to compromise actually some of the costs to actually be able to improve and to adapt to climate change and to global change and our threats. And that's something really important I think politicians and decision makers need to be aware of. We need to actually deliver those messages out there because, you know, I think it is really important that people actually want to move forward. And that's very, very, it's a really strong message. Do you agree, Stephen, Dennis, John, with this? Sorry, I think you're muted, Stephen.
Work in their case study where, you know, the local authorities had some fear in terms of the power to implement a local tax to improve the water management, and yet they were very fearful of doing so. But we could see tax they imposed. So I don't know if Danny wants to come in there.
Yes, if I may add a comment on that, we were very surprised too. Something like when we asked the people, what would you choose if you have the option between making the nature more accessible for leisure for the people, or reinforcing conservation exclusion of people from nature? 90% of the people said they would prefer more conservation, less access to nature. And when we ask people why, we know that people tend to favor, as Thomas has put it, favor living in the countryside. If we ask the people, would you be in favor of more strict regulation and densification of urban areas? Almost 70% of the people, although this is not very common in the public debate, say, yes, we want the people to stay in the cities and leave more space to nature. So there is a really very very strong positive view in favor of nature. And also when we ask the people, if you had to choose between investing in reducing flooding risk and all the landslide risk against investing in biodiversity, people put really nature and biodiversity first, far in front of managing risk. Although we would think that people are more worried by being exposed to risk. So I think your comment is really a general outcome of very interesting outcome of Alice that public policy should build on. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Dennis and Stephen. Well, we're running out of time. Thomas, yeah, you want to say one thing? Go ahead.
Yeah, just one additional comment about what you said, Pepe, is that it's just an open question or open thinking, is that it's good that people want to move forward about nature-based solution and so on. And my guess is that if they are ready to pay something, would it be a kind of leverage for politicians to just not be more, I would say, more directive, more with more strong, with more normative and more strong policies. You know, they can just make it's kind of refugee behind civilians saying, okay, you are willing to pay, you're going to pay, so we're going to get that. But it's not a question of politician in that place. It could be like a way to use this kind of taxes as a way of, okay, I won't take that decision just because people can pay, and if they don't pay, they won't have it. And I think it could be dangerous to give this kind to keep this kind of message like that. So it's more like, okay, we are ready to accompany this politician decision if it is needed in terms of money, but it has to be taken by the decision makers at the very beginning. So that's my opinion.
Thanks, Thomas. Well, I think we need to wrap up now, and I think it's time for closing the final Congress of Alice. First of all, I would like to thank to all the speakers today. You made a great job. Thanks for holding there, everybody connecting to the Alice Congress. We had a really bad time at the beginning. Something completely unexpected happened, but we managed to solve it. So I would like to apologize to everybody. Sorry for those technical issues. We're getting in touch with John and Stephen so that they can record their own talks, and we will just copy and paste and put it into the long video that we're going to produce with this day. So don't miss those ones, because I think John had a lot of trouble to get his message across, and it's really important. I know it is. So we will solve that out. So if you want to see those talks, they will be available as soon as they send it to us. And apart from that, I would really like to thank to all the stakeholders from all the case studies. Honestly, all the people involved in Alice, from the Pasiego territory, from the Paiva catchment, from the Cowenon catchment, from the Carlingford log. Honestly, I think I'm really proud of being able to coordinate a project in which the stakeholder participation has been so enlightening, really. I also would like to thank to all the partners. Honestly, guys, I think we've done a great job. We have to be happy with what we generate. I think Alice is a nice kid. Hopefully she keeps growing and she keeps getting more mature. So I would like to thank all of you for all your efforts on the modeling, on the stakeholder participation, of course on the communication as well. Kirkus, you are behind the scene now, but we know you did a lot for the project. So thanks to all of you as well. Thanks to all the people from the ecosystem service side of things as well, and from, of course, all the barriers and solutions for the implementation of BGINs. I would also like to thank to all my colleagues here at the Environmental Hydraulics Institute, at the administration, to the IT, which are still here. More than 10 I have counted more than 10 laptops in here, so I don't know how this thing is working, honestly. I would actually like to thank also to all my colleagues from the technical and scientific part. Great group, amazing effort, and they all deserve long vacations, honestly. And I will also like to thank to the Interreg Atlantic Joint Secretariat for bringing us the opportunity to collaborate together within Alice. We still have a bit more to go and finalize the project with all the last bits, the administrative bits, which it will keep us busy for a while. And we hope we can actually interact with all of the people interested on the issues that we have treated within Alice. Finally, I think Alice came out to previous than the Green Deal strategy or the new European biodiversity strategy. But I believe that it supposes one of the first European and probably worldwide initiatives to integrate the stakeholders, ecosystem service models, biodiversity models to the design of blue and green infrastructure networks. So I think this is the way forward. What we try to do is the way forward for our adaptation to global change threats and for other threats and environmental risks that we are facing as a human society. I hope and we hope that Alice could evolve and the solutions, methods and experience that we have developed within the project could actually be used by others anywhere in the European Union and beyond. And I think we are really happy, any of the partners, to cooperate with any other people wanting to share this knowledge and experiences. So thanks to everybody, and I hope you have a great day today. And hopefully we can see each other together sometime soon.
Thanks, Pepe.
Thanks, Pepe.
Thanks.
Thanks, Pepe.
Ciao to everybody.
Thanks, everybody, and thanks, Pepe.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Champagne.
Bye, you all.
Champagne to celebrate.
Happy St. Patrick's Day.